The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. My name's Mark Fraser. I'm here in Paris hosting the webinar. Boach here, who I hope you can see and hear in England, is our technical expert. We're going to be going through a free webinar, just 40 minutes of tips on doing a GDPR compliant data protection impact assessment and risk assessment. So Boach is a technical expert. I'm just doing the intro. Could you advance a slide actually, Boach? I'm just going to talk about what things we're going to include from a high level. It will be what is and how important is a data protection impact assessment. There'll be a bit of a plug for our technical standard for data protection certification and what that says about data protection impact assessments and how to implement that. And then there'll be 20 minutes for Q&A afterwards. Just briefly, could you advance to the next slide? Our outcomes that we're looking to get from this is basically to help you understand what the requirements are for a DPIA and how to set up a solid risk assessment such that you will be able to really understand your data risks and those sensitive and high risk persons and the chances there are of exposing their data. And a little bit about our technical standard that you may already know about, but how that helps you to operationalize this and other aspects of GDPR. Thank you. Next slide. So a bit about me briefly. I have been in management systems and certification for about 14 years now. I am in Bureau Veritas. I've been here 3 years working in innovation and sustainability. And this product falls squarely in the innovation space. Enterprise risk is the portfolio of products that are managed by me to handle emerging risks that are coming out in the corporate world. And so information security, business continuity, anti-bribery, data protection, asset management. These are all the new management systems, schemes that I'm managing, along with sustainability and many of the responsible sourcing type schemes. So I guess really what I'm seeing is in this area is that when a new discipline like data protection or information security starts to engage with good sound procedures like management systems and certification, it's a way of bringing in a standardized, plan, do, check, act approach to managing the people that have an impact on data protection in this case. And so behavior and human behavior and how that affects compliance is really important. And the management system approach, or in our case, a technical standard approach, to help manage those risks is vital. So that's really what we're doing here. More importantly, though, Boach is our host, our technical expert for the day. So if you could show your slide, please, Boach. Boach I've known for 10 plus years. He's been an expert for more than 13 years on information security and business continuity and governance issues. Sat on the ISO technical committee for ISO 22301. Has been working with IT type schemes since Ticket back in the early noughties. And ISO 9001 auditor, 20000 auditor, and 27001 information security specialist, consultant, auditor, and today a trainer. So I hope you will have a good 40 minutes. I will hand over to Boach right now. The last thing I want to say just before I do that is you all have in the GoToWebinar tool the ability to post questions. And if you have questions, when they occur to you, type into the question box and submit that question. And at the end, in the last 20 minutes, I will be able to handle those questions and ask them to Boach. Rather than having people interrupting with voice as we go, we figured we should manage it so that they come at the end. So please put in your questions whenever they occur, and I will stack them up, and hopefully we'll have time to answer them all before the end of the hour. So if there's anyone with any issues, also type in the chat window or the question window and you can communicate with me. I'll be sitting quietly in the background here while Boach delivers the content. So hopefully, technically, everyone can hear and see us. I'm just going to switch off the webcam now to conserve bandwidth and hand over to Boach. Thank you very much. Enjoy the webinar.
Okay. Mark, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. If it is morning in your country, it is a wonderful morning here in England, and I would like to welcome you to our free webinar today about data protection impact assessment. I couldn't say that, sorry. Yeah, DPIA. It's an interesting topic, and I'll do my best in the next 40 or so minutes, to cover a lot of interesting stuff about DPIA. And if you have any questions, as Mark said, please feel free to put them in the chat box or the questions box so that we can answer at the end of this presentation. So what I would like to do is I would like to just cover the summary of tips in the beginning, and then we'll do exactly the same thing, at the end of this webinar. So we'll be talking about DPIA. We'll be talking about very useful tips about DPIA. But there's another interesting topic that we want to cover today, and it is Bureau Veritas Data Protection Certification Scheme Technical Standard. And it's a technical standard that I will talk about in a minute. But it's kind of very much aligned with ISO 9001 kind of ISO management standards. So it follows the plan to check X cycle, and it's aligned with the new Annex SL template. And we encourage people to have a structured approach to managing their GDPR compliance in their organization. So we'll talk about it in a minute, and we'll talk about how certification would help, how having a DPIA in place helps, because it is not mandatory for all organizations in GDPR. So we'll talk about it, and we'll talk about the importance of keeping the records and carrying out just regular activities on a schedule, if you like. So in the first place, we are talking about data protection impact assessment today. So impact. So when we start talking about impact, we need to understand why data protection is needed, why data protection exists, why we need that, and so forth. So the first question here comes to our mind is, who does GDPR affect? The GDPR affects, well, nearly everybody, individuals, employees, customers, third parties, suppliers, vulnerable people, inmates, everybody's affected, everybody's affected. So this is the very first thing. The other thing is the whole business is affected, basically, because there are lots of risks in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of data protection, in terms of reputation, in terms of trustworthiness, and so forth. So so it affects the businesses altogether in a way. And GDPR expects accountability from management. So the management of organizations are affected anyway. And obviously compliance is key, especially nowadays. All the governments, all regulators around the world just try to try to manage the business environment in a better way, because internet changed everything. We're talking about smart cities. For example, just yesterday, I heard that one of the electric car manufacturers have been considering putting driverless taxis on the road and allow people to add their own cars, electric cars, remotely controlled electric cars, to add to the fleet and earn money. So internet changes every single thing, everything. But internet comes with hurdles too, and all companies want to collect data. Everybody wants to be, a step ahead of everybody. And another important thing is non-compliance to some certain things in GDPR may arise some fines, eventually as a result of investigations, and they may go up to 20 million euros or 4% of the global revenue, whichever is higher, if you're a multinational organization. So we'll talk about these things, but as you can see, it affects everybody, it affects the business. So GDPR is in our lives, we can't really deny this. So what is DPIA? DPIA is, well, this is kind of an interesting question. To understand what DPIA is, we need to understand the information life cycle here. The data is somehow created as you were born, or even earlier, actually. So you have a name, you have a family, relations, you have some school records, you have health records, and all these data accumulate over years. So especially nowadays with the big data, the concept of big data, everybody's interested in acquiring data. So we acquire data, we create the data, and then we somehow store it somewhere. We use it, we process it, then we share it, because it is kind of a good thing to share and let other people to do good things on the data. And then at one point you archive that data and the information together, because it is not completely relevant. And then at one point you can destroy it. And in the middle there are lots of other steps which won't cover here because they're not relevant anyway. But this is the information life cycle at this point. So at each level here, we do things on the data. So we need to understand that we are processing data at each level, and these data can be related to very vulnerable people. It can be highly sensitive information, data, and we need to just protect it as much as we can. So what is DPIA? Well, the DPIA is a process, basically, to understand the importance of the data that you keep and the level of capabilities that you have on processing it. So you become aware of, Mark, I believe your microphone is still on. Is it possible to turn it off?
Oh, apologies. Yes.
No, thank you. Sorry. So it is a process to analyze your environment, basically. It is important to understand what your capabilities are, what the data that you're holding, and also why you're holding it. Is it really required? Is it the right amount of data that you're holding? So these are the analysis steps that you carry out, and eventually, it helps you to make a decision, an educated decision regarding to your processing activities and the security of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of personal data. Okay, so DPIA is a process to help you take educated decisions. This is it. But how important is DPIA? Well, we talked about the fines. Those fines are mostly related to breach of rights and freedoms of natural persons. But compliance to GDPR required processes and procedures can be subject to fines too. So these are, part of the administrative fines explained in GDPR, and they cannot be up to 10 million euros and up to 2% of the global revenue. As I said, this is different than the 20 million euro cap. This is about non-compliance to GDPR required processes and procedures, not breaching the rights and freedoms of individuals we're talking about here. And as a result of the DPIA, you will understand how important the personal data you're holding, how robust your processes are, and how strong your security is. And you identify your weaknesses, and you come up with a treatment plan, and you can implement that to improve your environment in terms of data protection. So DPIA helps to take educated decisions, to manage risks and budget, and to be confident, really. So it is really very important. But from my perspective, the most important thing is you become more respectful to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. So this is very important. This is kind of a cultural thing. In Europe, individualism is the main idea. So individuals are the utmost creatures, if you like. It is not the community in the first place, that is most important thing, but the individuals. But in other cultures, this is different. For example, I'm originally from Turkey, and in Turkey, you can easily discuss your health records, your health issues, and everything in front of other people, with the doctor at the hospital, with the doors open. If everybody can come in and go out, and even the doctors don't care about that. So in Eastern cultures, if you like, this communal understanding just prevents us to implement a certain level of privacy. However, with the advancement of technology, with the internet just going everywhere and affecting all lives all around the world, we just need to think about it, because individuals, experience damage out of this. So, that is the good side of it. It is important because we need to respect to individuals' rights. We need to be more confident. We need to be, more agile, more effective in our management structure and everything. But on the other side of the coin, there are penalties defined in GDPR. Obviously, there are some warnings, reprimands, some suspension decisions, and so forth. But also there are fines, going up to 20 million euros, as we explained. And this has been just covered in the media for the last 2-3 years. It's been quite scary. Recently, CNIL in France issued a 51 million euros fine to Google. There are a couple of cases against Facebook being investigated, I believe. So as you can see, GDPR is warming up with the fines and everything, and every single organization, believe me, I'm an information security specialist, and I sit in the Information Security Management System Standard in the committee in the UK, and I can easily tell you that every single organization around the world is prone to cyber security breaches. Every single organization. It is inevitable. There's no way out of it. So at one point you may experience an incident, a breach, a personal data breach. So we need to be very careful about that. So every company may end up with paying a certain level of fines anyway. And accountability is really very important in that sense, because without the management's commitment, there's no way that you can be completely compliant to GDPR anyway. And we have good news, actually. What you may need, you don't always need that, but what you may need is a structured approach to managing your compliance level with the GDPR. And in GDPR, there's a concept explained as accredited seals and certificates. So there will be some seals schemes and certification schemes accredited by the European Data Protection Board and accepted the processes within that. That will help to prove your compliance levels to the regulators in case you need it. So Bureau Veritas was one of the pioneers in that area, and they published a data protection technical standard for the certification, and it has been going through the accreditation process now, but it's a long process. European Data Protection Board hasn't concluded anything about it yet, and there hasn't been any accredited seal or certification scheme published. But Bureau Veritas Data Protection Technical Standard certification scheme has been going through the process, and it's going to be one of the very first, possibly. Mark will talk more about it in a minute. But what is it? Well, it just really addresses the accountability practice principle in GDPR. So it is very much, as I said in the beginning, it's very much aligned with the management system standards, the Annex SL, and so forth. So it helps you to have a certain level of transparency and visibility in your organization's compliance activities. So you have targets, objectives, measurements, you have documentation, documented information, you have your communication, resource management, everything really. So it helps you to manage your relationship with the supervisory authorities too, in case of investigations. But we need to be very clear, it is not a legal requirement, and it is the Bureau Veritas's view of managing the process of compliance to GDPR. Though it's a very robust process, and it helps the accountability principle to be embedded in your organization to meet the GDPR requirements internally.
Can I just jump in a little bit there? Just
Yes,
to say that, yeah, Bureau Veritas organized this, and we've published this technical standard, and it's downloadable, and you can download it. I will post a link into the chat box actually in a minute, just for those of you maybe who haven't seen it. But we contracted and involved legal specialist Alain Bensoussan and the Lexing network of lawyers, and we brought in some of our customers like IBM to that process in order to have more technical input, more consensus around that. And the first version of the standard was published in 2017, version 0. Version 1 we published in 2018 in June last year. We're going through this accreditation process that's taking some time. The European Data Protection Board is issuing updated guidance, and the local supervisory authorities are updating their guidance for accreditation. On the back of that, you may have seen the ICO one recently has just come out from the UK. And so because this guidance is now still emerging, the accreditation hasn't been granted, although we have been in the process. We've applied for it over a year ago through the Dutch accreditation authorities. So really the message is it will come when the European Union's institutions are ready, and when we do that, we're at the front of the queue because we submitted first. But don't let that delay you. It will come. We will get an accredited certification standard because the market needs it, because it's a way to claim compliance under Article 42 and Article 43 of the regulation. It's a matter of time. So, but meanwhile, you could have a breach, as Boach is saying. Meanwhile, you need to demonstrate transparency, get your processes in place, operationalize the regulation in your company, and that's what this document does. And Boach, I'm going to hand back to you. Sorry, just jump in there with that little clarification. But this is how it works.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much. Thanks a lot. It's really very important from my perspective anyway. But thanks for the clarification. So as Mark said, meanwhile, even though there's no certification scheme or so, you are still obliged to meet the requirements of GDPR anyway. And this technical standard is one way of doing that, and it is structured in a way that you can see the representation on the screen. I won't get into much detail here, but it is very much aligned with the management system standards, ISO management system standards. Okay, so if you implement this standard, you'll be aware of the regulatory responsibilities. You will be more effective in your management, and you will manage your relationships in a better way. And potentially, because your maturity is higher, you will be able to prove the regulatory authorities, if you have experienced a significant data breach, that you have already invested in this area, and you're already mature, and you've done a lot to protect personal data. So there will be potentially reduced fines in case you experience any kind of significant challenges from the supervisory authorities. Okay, so let's come back to the DPIA. The reason we covered the technical standard, because the DPIA itself is not enough. There needs to be an accountability principle implementation in the organization, so that everything can happen. And this is why we covered that, because it's a way of doing that. But DPIA is also another important thing. Without the DPIA, it is really very hard to understand the level of importance of processing personal data. But it is not always mandatory in GDPR. So it is mandatory in some cases where your processing is likely to result high impact on the rights and freedoms of natural persons. So if you are working on a large scale of data, sensitive data process, for example, if you are systematically monitoring people, if you are combining different data sets, which in the beginning seems very simple, very basic, but when you combine data sets, it becomes really very powerful, and the data can be very, very, very sensitive because it can be analyzed. So there are different cases where the DPIA becomes mandatory. So you need to be very aware of that, and you need to understand the criteria of DPIA very well. And there will be another presentation in a month's time, a more in-depth version of this one, and we will cover the criteria even in in a deeper way. So in some cases, even if you are processing, sensitive data in large scale, even if you are doing something really impactful, highly impactful on rights and freedoms of natural persons, but you may be still exempt of carrying out the DPIA. And if there's a legal basis, for example, and if there is already a DPIA carried out for that legal basis, then you don't need to do a DPIA on this area. Or the supervisory authorities will be publishing their list of processing operations, and in that list they will exclude some processes from being subject to DPIA, and it will follow anyway. So as you can see, the main criteria, my main criterion is if your processing is likely to create a high impact on the rights and freedoms of natural persons, then DPIA is mandatory. So how can we implement DPIA? Well, DPIA is kind of an interesting thing. First of all, you identify the processing activities. You try to understand, what kind of data you're holding and what you do with those data. And then you look at the data, you look at your processing, and you say, okay, is it really necessary that I'm doing this? Because in many cases, organizations collect a lot of data and do lots of things, but they're not really necessary for their main purpose. And they need to ask the question about proportionality. Well, I collected this amount of data, but are these fields in my database, are they really needed? So if these the answers to these questions are no, then you need to just make your database a bit smaller, and you need to get rid of unused, irrelevant data, so that you become compliant to GDPR. Anyway, so you need to consider, okay, you have the database, or you have the collection of your data, and you need to understand, how you are already at the moment protecting it, and then you carry out a risk assessment to understand what further risks are in the environment that your processing activities and your organizations are exposed to, and you create a risk treatment plan, and then you carry out the risk treatment activities, and then you keep the documentation, you keep the records about decisions, about the results, about the effectiveness, and so forth, and then you monitor and review what you have done in the past. As you can see, this is kind of a plan to check X cycle, and then it starts again. So it is very much an ongoing, a continuing cycle, and it never ends unless you stop processing personal data, which is really very hard in organizations anyway. So we talked about identifying the processes, the data, and so forth. So one way of creating that information is creating data flow diagrams. You can create data flow diagrams. You can understand what kind of data you're holding, where it is processed, what kind of processing activity you are carrying out, and so forth. So I would definitely encourage you to draw some data flow diagrams. They're really very basic. You can use your pen and paper and create some drawings on your notebook anyway. It's not a big deal. But if you keep records, then it's really very good. And if you publish them, they look very professional anyway. So I would definitely encourage you to do that. And there are some other ways of data collection. You can review documents, you can do interviews, you can just carry out some test exercises, you review the applications, the interfaces, you look at the databases, and so forth. And all these things will help you to understand which department or which part of the business is holding what kind of information, what kind of data, whether it's a personal data, whether it's a sensitive data, whether it's a high risk data, and what you do about that, and how secure you are doing it, what kind of weaknesses you have in place, what kind of improvement activities you need. So all these things, can come out of these data collection methods, analysis of the results of these data collection methods. And for the DPIA, first of all, you need a methodology. And if you have a DPO, which I would definitely encourage you to have one, because normally it's free of charge. You don't need to pay for that, but it's another role. So you need to assign somebody to that role, and it needs to be completely impartial of their day-to-day role when they're carrying out their duties as DPO. So you need to be very careful about that. But I would definitely encourage you to have a DPO. Well, the DPO having a data protection officer is not mandatory for many organizations, and we will cover this in the in-depth webinar in June. You can get away with not having a DPO if you're a private organization or if you meet some certain criteria, but having a DPO is a good thing, and I would definitely encourage you to do that anyway. And it shows the supervisory authorities that you are taking things seriously and you're trying to create an independent role within the organization to oversee what's going on, which is a good thing for the organization too. So you need to engage the management team, and you need to get feedback from data subjects if it's possible. The GDPR talks about some surveys, talking to people whom you are collecting information or data. So it is really important to talk to them. And you create this set of documentation as a result of DPIA. And you need to analyze them, and you need to identify, action items in alignment with the impact levels of impact levels of processing personal data. And this is really very important. And as a part of it, you need to carry out a risk assessment on the actual controls that you have already implemented in your organization. So DPIA is an umbrella, if you like, and risk assessment is a part of it, but it's a crucial part of it. And if you don't have it, please have it, because GDPR requires organizations to have security controls implemented to protect personal data, even if they conclude DPIA is not needed in their organization. So even if you don't carry out the DPIA, you have to have security controls implemented. There's no defined list in GDPR talking about which controls they are, but it requires organizations to do that. Anyway, so we talked about the DPIA, the process itself, how you can implement it, and I gave you a couple of tips. And we talked about the risk assessment too, but we didn't talk very much about how you can do that. Again, in GDPR, there's no defined process for carrying out the risk assessments. There are lots of methodologies out there. There are some guidance documents coming out of European Data Protection Board, or there's an organization called ENISA, European Institution of Security, if you like, a security agency, and they have publications about GDPR risk assessment too. But you can do whatever you want, really. If you can justify it, if you are comfortable with that, if you have taken it through your accountability principle implementation activities within your organization, then you can be confident that what you have done is correct. But please consider that personal data is an important thing. You need to protect that. You have to protect that, and you have to be respectful to your data subjects, to your partners, if you like. For example, if you're collecting data from me personally, I'm a partner to you. I'm providing a certain set of goods, if you like, that you make money out of. So I'm a partner. I'm a supporter to your business. So being respectful to my rights and freedoms is a very nice thing to do. Not in many organizations, as I said, but it has to start from somewhere, because internet doesn't have physical borders, unfortunately. Anyway, so the risk assessment process, risk treatment activities, can be grouped in 5 categories, if you like. You will find on the internet as 4. Maybe there are some other some sites just claiming some different things, but in generally, you can temporarily accept or just delay the implementation of the risk treatment activities for a while. You can transfer it to a third party, to an insurance company, for example, or to a big organization, a consultancy organization that you're working with. You can share it, if you like, through some agreements, through some contracts, or you can implement controls and you can reduce the level of risk, or you can completely avoid or eliminate the risk by in many cases by stopping that processing activity at all. So whatever you do, it needs to be justifiable anyway. And once you have the risk assessment, you have the data inventory, asset inventory, you have the risk threats, the likelihood of those threats, or of the negative the adverse consequences of those threats, and the levels of risks, and whether you want to accept it or not, and the risk treatment activities, basically. And you need to implement the things that you are not comfortable with, and you need to keep records of those things. But interesting enough, you have to have decisions recorded if you decided not to implement anything. For example, if you have decided that you don't need any DPIA, you have to keep a record of that and justification to that. And if you have a DPO, please include his or her ideas, opinions into that decision-making process, and keep the records of it, so that you can prove to the supervisory authorities that you have done things in proper manner. Anyway, so as a summary, well, DPIA is important. This is one interesting thing, and I definitely encourage you, even if it is not a requirement for your organization, please carry out DPIA. Even if it is at a very basic level, just start it and experience, how it is like, and what kind of benefits it brings to you. It is, from my perspective, if you know things around your organization, then it will give you a certain level of power, and you want to go further. And if it's possible, please assign a DPO. As I said, I'm very fond of that because I believe in impartial reviews and opinions, and I believe that role can add a lot of value to your organizations. And keep records of DPIA and risk assessments, especially if you are excluding anything, or if you are just deciding that you don't need to implement anything. So you have to have justifications and decisions recorded there. Just keep the management decisions records, keep your management system records, if you like internal audits, like performance metrics and so forth, and regularly conduct a DPIA. But as you can see, all these things if you have any management system standard, ISO management system standard implemented in your organization, these are very much aligned with the management system standard requirements. And they are really, because the GDPR just have that kind of mentality anyway. I'm not talking that they follow the management system standard mentality, but it is a universal approach, if you like. And GDPR somehow is it's possible to implement a GDPR compliance project with the PDCA cycle. But there's a better option here. You can use the Brevetas Data Protection Technical Standard. It is one of many, possibly. It's free of charge. You can download it for free, and it is, if you have a certification in your organization, it will be very, very easy for you to implement that. If you don't have a certification, it is still a very nice document to have and easy to implement if you follow, what is required and so forth. It is not a usually technical document, so it is easy to understand, and you don't have to go through the certification. It will just help you to create a certain level of transparency and so forth. And you can get more information from Mark and his team, and also in local country offices of BVs. And if you have a certification at the end, believe me, it will help you to justify your decisions, justify your actions and so forth. And it will make you more mature, so that the supervisory authorities will come to an agreement in an easier way in case you are experiencing any kind of significant personal data breach. It's all from me for now. I will hand over to Mark to handle the questions, and I will be very happy to respond to your questions. Okay, Mark, it's yours.
Thanks a lot, Boach. It's a really good whistle-stop tour through data protection impact assessment and risk assessment and what feeds into that. I should mention that we are doing the full in-depth version of that with more content, which I'm just posting a link to. If you want to register for that, that's coming up towards the end of June. It will be done by Boach as well. So if you want to get more depth on this, you come back, register. We will charge you €40 for that one because it is deeper content. But as Boach says, we have courses in country. We have online webinars here, and this was really the free tips to get you started. So use the time now. I haven't had any questions during the webinar yet, so I hope you're all still out there and still awake. Now's your time. Type the questions into the question box if you have any. I have one from an earlier webinar which I'm going to ask again because it was a good question. So use this time though to type in your own genuine questions. You've got an expert who's available for 15 more minutes who you can ask about any questions you've got to do with the data protection impact assessment, risk assessment, or more widely on the GDPR. If Boach can't answer, he will say so, but you've got an expert available. Don't miss this opportunity. So the question I got in our webinar on Tuesday, which was interesting, was what is the relation of the technical standard, the BV technical standard, towards the new ISO that's being developed, ISO IEC 27552. So this is, for those of you who are not aware, it's due to publish in November, I understand, and it's a management system standard and guidance for data privacy. So I don't know if you have anything you want to say about that, Boach, but that's probably something that I think the delegates would be interested to hear.
Yeah, well, that guidance document will be really very important, and organizations will be very much interested in that. However, the Bureau Veritas data protection's technical standard has been developed separately, and Mark, you have more information about the development processes and stages of the technical standard. Well, it is the guidance document will be a more technical document, if you like, and it will help organizations to find their ways through the complex structure of ISO standards. It will refer back to many other documents, but it will give really a lot of good guidance about managing their privacy and data protection activities. However, on the other hand, the BV data protection technical standard is very much aligned with the GDPR compliance. So yeah, you'll just
well, thanks.
you can talk more.
We don't know. This is the thing. That's why it's a tricky question. This is, I've just Googled, as you've seen, the ISO standards, and this is what they're calling it, security techniques, and it's an extension to 27001 and 27002 for privacy information management, requirements and guidelines. So it's quite a big scope by the sounds of it. I guess I would say, reiterating what Boach has said, is that what the Article 42 and 43 of the regulations say is that you need to have a certification scheme that is aligned to ISO 17065.
A captive unit.
Does that mean like a closed unit? Do you want to clarify that, Saumya? Maybe we'll come back to you. There is another question. How the regulators will judge if the global firm is following the GDPR guidelines in all of their branches around the world. This one is from Chintamani. How will regulators judge the global firm following the GDPR guidelines in all of their branches around the world?
Okay. Well, I believe these two questions are somehow related. Saumya, please let us know if they are not, so that we can answer your question, separately. But Chintamani, thank you very much for this for this question. This is the scary bit for the companies outside of Europe, obviously. So what GDPR has, it has a scope, if you like, so what it says is, wherever you are in the world, if you are processing personal data of European citizens or people who are at the Europe at the time of the data processing, then you are you have to be compliant to GDPR. So this is the scope. It is really very hard to manage, obviously, but jurisdiction doesn't go that far. The European courts decisions won't be applicable to many countries around the world. According to United Nations, I believe there are 238 countries in the world now, and European Union has only 28, 27 countries, well 30 something, including the extensions. But it will be international laws that will be in aid to implement those decisions. However, there are some other things in GDPR, and one of them is called I'll show you that. Can I share my screen,
Sure.
Mark, for a minute?
Yeah. Let me just flip you back to being presenter.
Okay.
There you are.
Let's show my screen. Okay. Okay, I'll show you that one so that you will see it in a better way. In the beginning, we talked about the accredited schemes and so forth. So there are 3 items at the top: binding corporate rules, codes of conduct, and accredited seals and certificates. We talked about the accredited seals and certificates. Codes of conduct, they are related to sectors mostly. They are not company-related things, but they are kind of standardized controls for the sector members. But at the top, it's called. There's another concept called binding corporate rules. So binding corporate rules is kind of an interesting thing. It's coming from the previous data protection directive in European Union, and eBay or Amazon or Facebook or Google or any kind of global multinational organization can create their binding corporate rules to ensure their level of compliance to GDPR. Then they need to ensure that these corporate rules are very well structured, then they take these binding corporate rules to the supervisory authorities in any of the European Union country, or they can directly go to the European Data Protection Board, I believe, but they will forward them to the supervisory authorities again. And then, you know, they will review these binding corporate rules, and they will negotiate if there's anything that they need to be they want it to be amended, and eventually they will approve that company's binding corporate rules. And this means that, you know, for example, if you're working for Google, Google has a binding corporate rules set, and it is approved by the European Data Protection Board. This means that, you know, if you are following those rules, then the European Data Protection Board accepts that you are compliant to GDPR. And obviously, it is not only the rules; it comes with the auditing. It comes with, you know, regular reviews, performance measurements, and that kind of stuff. All the things that we're talking in accountability principle of GDPR. So this is how they ensure that, you know, all organizational branches all around the world are compliant to GDPR requirements by following their binding corporate rules, and the corporate assesses the level of compliance to their own binding corporate rules. I hope this is clear to you.
Good stuff. Good stuff. We did have a clarification, thanks, Bach, from Salmia about what a captive unit. So he means a processor, I think, in the terms of the regulation. So someone that is based in India, the back office is based in India, but the main front office is in the UK. So to me, that means a processor, a data processor under the regulation. So the question is, just to reiterate it, if you are a processor in India, what are the precautions and points to keep in mind? Which is a pretty wide open question. Can I just say a little thing before you get into the technical stuff? Because we do have in the white paper and the technical standard, at the back of the technical standard, there is in the matrix, it does identify those elements of the technical standard which apply to processors, and it's not as many as apply to controllers, data controllers being the front office, the people who have the relationship with the consumer, with the data subject. So, but yeah, basically the processors and the controllers have to work hand in glove together when you have outsourced or back office services offshore out in India. And yeah, it has to be compliant. That's my simplistic answer, but over to you, Bach, for the deeper content. If you have
Yes,
5 minutes. Yeah.
Actually, you're absolutely right about that. It's just as you explained, you know, the captive unit or support unit, as far as I understand, you know, is the data processor being in India or being in another country in the world. So we call it the data processor. And in GDPR, there's a new thing compared to a data protection directive, that data processors are jointly responsible for compliance to GDPR within their responsibility areas, obviously, but the overall responsibility lies still lies with the data controller. But the data processors are responsible for that too, and data processors have to be open and very helpful towards the data controller. For example, for the DPIA, when you're carrying out the DPIA, you will see that you have a lot of third parties. Even within the organization, for example, you know, that are processing the data on behalf of you. So this is what we call the data processors. You become the data controller, and they become the data processors. And they have to get involved in the DPIA. They have to give you real and open and transparent answers to DPIA questions and data collection requests, so that you can analyze the impact and carry out the risk assessments accordingly. And if they don't do that, it is really very important for the data controller to do something about it, because GDPR, in accountability principle, GDPR states that, you know, creating written agreements with third parties, and especially with the data controllers, and managing those contracts are really very important, you know, because we are transferring data to the third parties, even in third countries, for example, like India. So we need to be very aware of that situation, and we need to tell the data processor that as the data controller, we have the utmost responsibility towards GDPR, but they are still responsible for securing the data on our behalf. They are responsible for ensuring that the DPIA is carried out. They are responsible for ensuring that the risk assessments are carried out and the risk treatment plan activities are implemented. So it is a joint responsibility, if you like, and it is managed through the contracts. It is managed through the service level agreements, second party audits, performance reviews, questionnaires, awareness activities, all sorts of things that you can manage through a management system approach, if you like, and the BV's technical standard may help you to do that.
Thanks, Boach. Well, we're coming to the end of the hour. I don't have any more questions, so thank you very much for attending. I've got a couple of announcements to make. We've just completed the free tips webinar on the DPIA and risk assessment. We did have one earlier in the week, a free tips one on breach response. You will see that we have in-depth webinars of both of these in late June. On Wednesday, the 26th, we have the in-depth webinar on breach response. You can register here. I will send out the slide decks to you as a PDF so that you will get the links that you can click on. You visit our lead website and you can register for these events. Boach and I will be hosting this again, and it will be going deeper. So I encourage you to join us at those sessions for a very reasonable price of just €40. I would say for free, you can get our self-assessment tool, iCheck. This is iCheck for cyber and data, and this is a 55 question set, the GDPR one, on assessing your compliance to the regulation. So it's free to download from Google Play or the App Store. Go and get it now and just self-check. Whether you're a processor or a controller, it applies and you get a score out at the end, and you can decide where you maybe have opportunities for improvement and areas where you need to deepen your compliance. But it equally applies for cybersecurity as well. There's two different question sets you can use. The classroom training, we do a one-day introduction to GDPR for business leaders. This is run in our country offices, face-to-face training. You visit your local country office to organize that, and their website links are there. We're planning on doing the virtual version of that with Boach in September, yet to confirm the exact date, but that way if you're not located near to a BV office, you can register for the online version, which is quite an intense two-part 4.5-hour training, which basically crams in everything you would learn in a full day, but doing it virtually. The technical standard, if you want help implementing that, we do have a 2-day mastering the technical standard course. You can again register that locally. That's face-to-face. More information on that there, and you can see a little plug here for the technical standard, but also the white paper. So the white paper, what it has is a simple way to understand why a technical standard can help you operationalize the GDPR for your organization, so that you can help sell it to your bosses, the business people maybe. But also, you see here, there's a page that shows the matrix with 4-column grid. This shows how the GDPR and our technical standard aligns with 27001 and 9001, the information security and quality management systems. So if you've already got one or both of those in place, it's kind of like a quick cross-reference matrix to see where those elements are touching. So you can harmonize your documentation, your processes, your governance in order to make that more efficient. So I step back from saying an integrated management system, because as we know, the technical standard isn't a management system, but that's how you would practically implement. And so just a quick plug for some of the other products in the portfolio: information security, IT service management, business continuity, asset management, anti-bribery. We have a lot of services and products, certification, training, and tools for these products. Go and have a look on our website. Also, a special that we're focusing on right now is anti-bribery, because it's another new and emerging issue for compliance officers, and it's compliance to anti-corruption or anti-bribery. So there's a series of courses and a white paper that are available, and in-country as well as webinars. So there's some links here which you will have when I send out the slide deck to you all. So that's really it. Thank you very much for your time. We're bang on an hour. I really appreciate your taking part, and thank you very much to Boach for sharing his knowledge with us in this session. So, goodbye from me, And I guess hope to see you on the paid for webinars later.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to be with you, and hope to see you next time. Thank you. Bye.